What's going on, everybody? Back again with another video. This is from round 4 of the Suberbet chess classic that is taking place right now in Romania. We are going to look at the game between Dominguez and we also with the white pieces, and we're going to also look at Aronian with the black pieces. Now we're going to be talking about isolated pawns. That's what this game revolves around. This is the second video I'm doing today, but this is going to concentrate on isolated pawns. Before I get into the video, I want to encourage everyone, please check the links below, because I put a lot of additional resources down there, and also a donation link. If you could like the material, please consider supporting my channel. Definitely subscribe, hit the thumbs up button, and also participate, get in the comments section below there. Also, I've posted in the links below this book that you see there below. Pawn Structured Chess is an excellent book. I always say, don't study openings. Don't waste your time on openings. You don't need to study openings. Take my word for it. I've been playing chess for a very long time. You don't need to study openings till you're about 2400. Right? You need tactics, simple end games. But what I do suggest you study is you study pawn structures. And hopefully this game will be another example of why you study structures as opposed to openings. So let's get into it. And I want to remind everybody again, Chess Audiobooks is on Instagram, Twitter, Lead Chess, chess.com, and also Instagram. So please follow me on those platforms. So let's get right into it. Dominguez has the white pieces, Aronian black pieces. So e4, e5, knight of 3, knight c6, bishop c4, very popular opening nowadays, Joko piano. Castle, no Evans Gambit with b4. It's not the 1800s. Castle, knight f6, d3, castle, h3, it's all standard, d5, e takes d5, knight takes d5, knight bd2, a5, knight e4 hitting the bishop, bishop b6, c3, f6, and now white is going to go for his break with d4 here. Alright, d4, e takes d4. Now you see all of these arrows that I've placed on the board. Okay, have no fear, I will explain them all to you. Notice that the knight on d5 is pinned by the bishop on c4. This discourages black from capturing with his pawn on d4 and taking an extra pawn on c3, as the knight would be captured. And even if he was able to, say, protect that knight by moving his knight on c6 to e7, white will capture the c3 pawn with his knight that's on e4, and black would just ultimately lose a piece. This is why white can afford to just play quietly right here with rook e1. He's not worried about losing the pawn here. King h8, getting the king off the dangerous diagonal, and now c takes d4. So now we're going to talk about isolated pawn positions. And like I said, this is why you want to study structures and not openings. Reason is, this structure can occur in many different openings. Alright, it doesn't matter. For example, I have here on my notes some of the openings that you can see an isolated pawn show up in. Alapin variation of the Sicilian, French defense exchange variation, Caro-Kann defense, Panov attack, Queen's Gambit accepted. Alright, that's for white. For black, again, French defense, Slav defense, Moran variation, Queen's Gambit decline, Tarish variation. Some of you are familiar with that. Alright, so if you study the structure, right, then you can learn how to play various openings. It doesn't matter what the opening is, because you understand the principles of the structure. For instance, so when I study chess, for instance, I'll study, say if I'm studying isolated pawns, I'll look at a bunch of games with just isolated pawns, and I'll look at the strong side of isolated pawns and the weak side. So I might study a bunch of games where I'm looking at where the player with the isolated pawn wins, so only wins from the isolated pawn side. so I can see this what it looks like when it's, you know, for the strength of the isolated pawn. Then I'll go and study the other side when the person with the isolated pawn loses, so I can see the weak side. That's how I would prepare when I played a lot of chess actively over the board. Is study themes and concepts, not necessarily, oh, I need to study the Joko piano. No, you really don't need that until you like 2400, 2500. Then you got to get into the opening and all that deep preparation and stuff. And this is from years of experience interacting with different international masters, grandmasters. There's a lot of people that haven't cracked open a chess book, right? And I know people say that in tongue in cheek, but there's a lot of people that haven't cracked open a chess book and made it to master 2200, 2300 just based on tactics and just understanding simple end games. Tactics is really what you need to learn. Unfortunately, tactics can be boring, studying tactics and playing like solitaire chess and stuff, but that's really the foundation you need to get really good is tactics. That'll get you to master tactics is simple end games. You don't need to study the opening. It's a big mistake that a lot of beginning chess players make, because they say, hey, if I don't study the opening, I'll lose in 10 moves. No, you lose in 10 moves because you don't see tactics. If you study tactics, you'll find the moves. You think there was all this opening theory when Morphy was playing? No, his tactical ability was so strong that he just found the moves, and of course these moves became opening theory. Now let's talk about the isolated pawn, right? Again, I have my notes here. So the isolated pawn gives you better control of the center, right? The E5 and C5 squares, as you can see. Because of this, white has more active squares on which to develop his pieces and has some space advantage. All right. Notice too, though, in this position, black has his pawn on F6, right? So he's already chipping into that statement right there. White can make the breakthrough D4 D5, right? It's a major strategic threat, giving him the initiative. Notice right now, black's knight is blockading on D5. White also usually has king side attack possibilities. Attack on F7 square, usually a knight sacrifice, you'll see if you look at enough games. Transfer of the rook along the third rank. You can see how that's possible. And sacrifices, either with the bishop on H6 or with the knight on E6. And sometimes you attack with the H pawn, that's rare. And you usually get good playing along the C file, and you can see how that's possible. Alright? And sometimes you'll get that play with the you also get a queen side play also with the pawns. Now that's if you have the isolated pawn. If you don't have the isolated pawn, you're playing against it, so you're black here, you want control over the D file, over the D square, which should be occupied especially by a knight. You see that right there. King is usually protected with the G7 G6 to stop the threat on the B1 H7 diagonal, because a lot of times white will line up the bishop and queen, so you wind up playing G6 a lot of times. And as long as black still has a dark squared bishop, there are no real threats on the weakened dark squares, and you can see black still has his dark squared bishop. Alright, and that's just like some basic considerations. Alright, in general, I'll give you the general rule, right? In general, white, sorry about that, I'm distracted out here. In general, when you have the isolated pawn, you want to keep the pieces on the board. Alright, that makes sense, because the isolated pawn needs to be protected by pieces since there's no other pawns. Alright, you need dynamic chances, because it is a static weakness in the long term to have, right? So the more pieces you have, the more chance you have of generating an attack. Okay, but when you fight against it, you want to exchange the pieces. Alright, so it's with these ideas in mind, and thank you for bearing with me. Again, hit that like button, please, subscribe, all that good stuff. It's with these principles in mind that the game is gonna follow. So just look at the rest of the game and you'll see all the ideas I just mentioned. They'll be visible throughout. This is how you learn, and this is how you get good at chess, is by learning these principles and concepts. Don't get caught up in, oh, that's the Joko piano, oh, that's the Alapin, oh, that's the French defense. Learn the structures. And that book is real good that I put there. Please go to the links. You could get that just go through my links. You'll support the channel. And the book is really good because what it does is each chapter goes through a certain pawn structure and explains the plans, the typical plans, and gives examples. And it's a great book. It's an old book, but it's classic. I highly recommend it. If you are FIDE masters out there, get in the comment box. If you have the book, get in the comment box below, please, and tell people to get that book. All right, let's go on. So we have the isolated pawn showing up. Bishop f5, knight g3, bishop g6, and of course, white is going along for his kingside attack. He's trying to set up for that. Look at his knights already. The rook e8, and of course, Aronian wants to trade. Rook takes e8, queen takes e8. One set of rooks going. So that's if we had to, like, you know, move the dial a little bit one way or the other, that's a net plus for black. Queen g4, mate on board. Queen f8. All right. Now, queen f8 deals with the threat. Now the bishop on c1 faced with a little dilemma because there's not that many squares for that bishop to go to. Right? It's d2, or there's an idea of playing b3 and then putting the bishop on a long diagonal with bishop b2. Dominguez chooses bishop d2 here, rook d8, rook e1, and now knight de7, offering the trade of bishops right there on c4. Okay. And again, this is good for black. Now black is attacking a2 and d4 pawn multiple times. Okay. So there's a lot of weaknesses in the white position. All right. And I'm not sure if white has enough compensation here. So bishop c3. All right. So now the bishop looks like a glorified pawn. However, white would love to play d5 at some point. Of course, Aronian traded off some more pieces. Another idea is knight d5, just blocking that, just killing that bishop. All right, that's a possibility too. Knight takes f5 was played. Knight takes f5, and now g6. All right, knight h6, queen f8, attacking the knight, and now d5. So here, Dominguez goes for it, because he has to bring his pieces to life here. Okay, if queen takes h6 here, then just simply bishop takes f6, and white will be winning just like that. As you can see, this attack on the rook here. Of course, check on the check on the king, and you have the knight. The knight is attacked. The rook is attacked. All right, so here, white is just winning. So after d5, knight b4 was played. Okay, maintaining attack on d5, but at least white has what he wants. Queen e6, more pressure on f6. F6. King g7, attacking the knight, and those two pawns on d5 and a2. Bishop takes b4. All right. This is a critical decision right here for Dominguez because, like I said before, you would like to keep the pieces on the board if you can. But you can see the knight being harassed on h6. So the other try is bishop d2. But then you're going to drop this pawn. All right. And let's say queen g4. And white wants to play rook e6, but doesn't really have enough time. The queen c5. And black's counterattack is in full swing. You see the f2 square. And now, with black being fully developed, white is just down a pawn at this point. So Dominguez makes the tough call. Bishop takes b4, a takes b4, knight g4, queen f7, queen e4. Of course, he doesn't want to trade queens, but he gives up the pawn. So there goes the isolated pawn, faces an ignominious ending. Just drops off the board there. Right, I'm sure at this point Re1 Aronian put his glasses on like this. Then he took the pawn. You know. Sometimes it's like that. When you play the isolated pawn, it could go either way. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. Bishop c5 happened, queen h6, king h8, queen to f4 here, rook d8. Alright, and now black is just consolidated, making sure he doesn't get mated. b3, and he's going to try to realize his material advantage. Knight e5, queen g7, make sure the king is protected. Knight f3, bishop goes back, and g3, b6, rook e6, and this is all getting black prepared for the advance of those pawns sooner or later. But right now he has to make sure that he deals with the threat of these heavy pieces from white. h4, h5, and of course Dominguez is trying to still make something happen with a limited amount of material. Queen e4, queen come to f7, comes to f7, bishop c5, and now f4, rook d8. Now you got the attack, double attack on the knight. Knight f3, and now king g7. Another idea was rook a8 attacking the a2 pawn, and you can see the rook is hanging in the corner, but if queen takes a8, then queen takes e6, queen b7, queen d7, king h2, king g8, queen e4, and again white just doesn't have enough. I'm sorry, black just doesn't have enough compensation for the loss of material. So instead, after king g7, f5, just really trying hard as Dominguez. G takes f5, queen takes f5, queen g6, and now the trade of queens is forced. So just like this is like the beginning and the end for white here. Queen g6. If he tries to play something crazy like queen h2, queen h3 rather than just queen c2 check. So queen takes and king takes g6. So why do I have these squares highlighted? The reason is I want you to see how inferior the knight is, right, in comparison to the bishop. So these are things that you should put in your memory banks also. In certain positions, you should be able to recognize which minor pieces are going to be superior, right? Sometimes the knight is going to be superior, but mostly in closed positions, right? In these type of open positions where the knight really doesn't have any place to hang out, like an outpost or anything, bishop is going to be better all day. So when you're looking at, say you're here, I don't know, like say you're like way back, I mean it's been bishop versus knight for a while, but like say you're like way back in the position and you're trying to figure it out, you know, you might want to you might consider like, hey, my knight is going to be horrible later on, you know, in this type of position. You know, you have to be able to think long term, strategically. Let's go back to the queen trade. So queens come off, and you can see the knight really has nowhere to go. All right, rook e2 and rook d3, and black's plan here is just to play rook c1 and then prepare to advance to the c pawn by moving the bishop. So he just wants to make sure that the c file is protected, that pawn is protected, and he's dominating the white position at the same time. Notice again, the white knight has no place to go, like productive. The white knight only can move around in his own territory, like go to move, you know, e1 and h2 squares like that. Okay, rook c2, rooks come off again closer to the end, and again the green highlights the lack of mobility of the knight. King f3, and rest needs little comment, but you can see the idea. Here comes that majority just rolling down the board, and now the bishop just supports the advance of the pawn. And after c2, Dominguez resigned. So again, the opening was a Gioco piano, but it doesn't matter. It was really any opening that involves isolated pawns. Okay, and the strategy is going to be the same. And understanding these principles also about isolated pawns will help you decide whether you should go into a position where you have an isolated pawn or not. All right, or if you want to give your opponent an isolated pawn. Sometimes a lot of chess players think like, oh, I'll just give them an isolated pawn, but then they wind up getting checkmated because that particular position is conducive to all type of attacking possibilities to that player. In this particular position, black already has a blockade on d5. He already has a pawn on f6, so he keeps the knight from jumping to e5. He already has some defensive measures in place already, and he's able to quickly trade pieces. So for Dominguez to go into the isolated pawn position here with this particular, you know, playing d4 at this moment, maybe he has to reevaluate that. You know, maybe he could have drawn the game, but hey, he's not really trying to draw with the white pieces. So maybe D4 was incorrect. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. Please get in the comment box. Please hit the like button, subscribe, all that stuff, and please support the channel. And definitely get that book out. Get that book from following the links below. And let me know what you think. And I'll see you guys on the next video. Have a good day.